It wants to be the only civilization that looks like a civilization in that place and take over all the resources. Yet they see the West as what needs to be destabilized. And think about it. America right now is putting all of its resources and potentially collapsing on itself and its economy, draining its military arsenal for what exactly? When this is what comes out of their mouths.
I think there's another revolution coming. I tend to steer it along with the achievement of a broader peace. When history is within reach. So what Israel is fighting here is not merely a seven-front war, but an eighth-front war. For the Jews against Rome. Rome and Jerusalem clashed over values with a great tragedy for the Jewish people. Oh, we lost that. We have to win the next one. But the new Rome, the United States, Jews against Rome.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Dissenting Goyim Show, episode 10. I had to take a moment there to catch that last part of the video, and I played the video because what she addresses in there is a perfectly good question that I think we all should be able to understand. We all should be able to ask without being scrutinized, without being questioned, without being called anti-Semitic. Why do we get to ask that question? Because in this war with Iran, nobody, at least nobody that I know, can tell you what the objective of the war is. We have seen all kinds of things, oil and other natural resources, nuclear weapons, and all of those excuses have fallen flat on their face because there is no credible evidence for it. So when it comes to asking this question, she is right. Part of the reason that they want this to happen is because they themselves want to be the only real civilization that exists. They want to control global hegemony outright. They want nobody to interfere. They want the rest of us to work for them. They want America, which, as it's been expressed, is that we are the gun and they hold it. They tell us what to do. They point and shoot, and we go get it. But we really still don't know why. Why do we ask how high when they say jump? Why do we load our planes and our carriers and our attack groups and say, tell us where to go and we will go? Why do we look at rulers that have nothing to do with us, that haven't bugged us or gotten in our way, and take them out? Because Israel wants them gone. Now, we have to be very clear. When it comes to this question, very few Israelis know what the long-term plan is. It has been expressed, we've seen that on Tucker Carlson, that they very blindly, very quickly run into battle when they're told to do so. Very pridefully, too. And so we have the idea of blind pride, and then we have the same idea in America, blind pride. We thump our chest. We say we can go get it. We say we can get it done. And at the end of the day, it hurts us. It hurts the rest of the world. And the only people who wanted to gain something was not the Israelis, but the people who run Israel. We can say Bibi Netanyahu, but we know that there's a higher power to Netanyahu. We know that there's a motivating factor. And that factor, to which has come under great scrutiny over the past couple weeks, because this war has been atrocious, it's been inhumane, it's gone against the basic principles of humanity. And for Christians, it's gone against the basic principle of Christ, which is love thy neighbor. Murdering people is not loving thy neighbor. Murdering people is not loving at all. It ends with death. It's hate. It's sin. And it's led by a warrior God. So we have the question of prophecy. Prophecy. Why do we go into battle? Because God wills it. Why do we go into battle? because Bibi Netanyahu has ordained himself by a few Talmudic rabbis as the ruler that takes the world into the end times, which is why they want to be the civilization left standing, which is why they look at us and they have to control us, because they know if we stand on our own independent and move in the direction that benefits us, they exist no longer. The elites that rule them exist no longer. So, when it's all said and done, we have to ask the question of prophecy. Whose prophecy? Whose prophet? Why is this important to the world? And why do we think that if we conclude this war, either through ceasefire, which won't happen, either through negotiation, which probably won't happen, realistically, it has to go through a final explosion, the nuclear power. We have two nuclear powers lobbing bombs at Iran, who is, in all rights, resisting the end of their civilization very successfully. But what do we get out of it? Again, I'm going to ask that. What do we get out of this conflict? So, when it comes to prophecy, we have to ask the question of where does it begin? Fundamentally, it's founded on the idea that we are following the chosen people into oblivion. We're following chosen people. We are the sheep that Jesus casted off the cliff. We are those, and we are following. Now, nobody's really asked the question, at least nobody in the mainstream media, because they're told not to, and shame on them if they do, because, well, you're about to be exiled, and how dare you have a thought for your own. But who are the chosen people? And truthfully, not even they can answer it. In fact, they couldn't even answer it in the Exodus. Exodus 12:37 through 38 has this drawn out idea of what we call the mixed multitude. The ones that make up, or that they believe make up, the chosen people. Now you have the bloodline of Israel, which is very specific. You have the mixed multitude who claim the power, and that argument never went away. And now we know why. Because they are not the chosen people, nor have they ever been, nor should we care as Christians, as a country that we supposedly have claimed very pridefully again as being founded on the fundamental principles of Christ. We shouldn't even care. This doesn't concern us. Anybody that thinks it does is stupid. And I'm sorry, I'm going to say that, because we have to ask the question. And truthfully, by this point in time, you should have already asked the question. The chosen people are not people that we are concerned with. The chosen people are their own thing, but they don't know if they're the chosen people because they're not the bloodline. And if we look at the East Coast, the people in Israel now are not the East Coast. And if they were the East Coast, then they're followed Baal, who is Yahweh, who is Ishkar. And that's a very, very, interesting point in itself. But we have two messiahs that we know were the ones that they were banking on. So, James the Elder, I asked the question, who is their Messiah and who returns at the end?
Well, they've had a bunch of messiahs. Recent book I read by a Jewish rabbi is titled 50 Jewish Messiahs, and there could be others that could count in that. But they always had the imminent hope of a Messiah, and the Messiah was a political and military leader. It's not a savior from sin. It wasn't what Christians would consider a Messiah at all, which is why the idea that Jews during that period would have accepted Jesus as their Messiah is really kind of far-fetched. The Zealots were by far the largest contingent there, just based on the number of fighters they were able to raise in the in the Jewish wars. So, you go through time. The notable ones are Sabatini Zevi, Jacob Frank, and then there are a number of others. Those are the most caustic and probably the most historically relevant going forward. But the whole idea of Jewish Messiah is completely different than Christian Messiah, as the Jewish religion is completely different than Christianity. And Jesus made this very, very clear over and over. Growing up in a Lutheran church, what I was taught, which was kind of classical, and agrees with Catholics, and was that the Jews rejected the prophets, rejected the Savior, and they were cast out. They were the synagogue of Satan. What this is called is replacement theology. Replacement theology is right. The new chosen people is the church. Now, with dispensationalism, which was, I think, also kind of crafted to get the result that it produced, that was replaced with this dispensational theology, where somehow Jews had a different path, and the promises that they lost because they rejected God in the Old Testament still applied, and they would be in our near-term future. So that's my answer to that. A little long-winded.
No, that's perfect, right? In the grand scheme of things, right, we have this idea that the Messiahs are different. Where the Jews are looking for a military, a political, some kind of world leader on the world stage in a political position. Realistically, that's what they're getting at, right? Christ wasn't that guy. Christ was I would argue, people can argue against me, is Christ was the mystic, so to speak, the existentialist in that time, saying, let's not do that, right? And so we look at that, and we have two different messiahs, one for Christianity and one for Judaism with Yahwist, and it could be Talmudic or it could be not, right? It's still the same, just two different ends of that spectrum. And so the argument here, right, when we look at the mixed multitude is, why has that question gone so far in history? And now to ask that question, who are the chosen people? Not that it concerns us, but people should probably know is who are the chosen people, right? Is why have all of a sudden this argument of the mixed multitude been in the Exodus and all throughout time, even down to this Sephardic, Ashkenazi, and Germanic Jews there? Why has all of a sudden it gotten to here now? And people are like, nope, that argument didn't exist. That's stupid. It's evil. It's the Canaanites. No, the Israelites never had that argument. This is specifically it. Where did that argument start to phase itself out, or where did they just say, let's just get rid of this argument?
Get rid of the argument for
the multiple chosen people. You have the Dame, the Frankists, and the other ones who systematically claim that they were the people, while telling the other claimed people that they weren't the people.
Well, it's if you go all the way back to the Jewish wars, Bar Kokhba, they weren't looking for relief from a Roman occupier. They were looking to replace Rome. And they were, Jews were about 10% of the Roman population at the time. These were number of combatants and casualty figures that were unprecedented in the ancient world. But the idea wasn't to free their province, free their area. The objective was to take over everything, which is just what you said in the opening. So it's they've always pretty much held to that. I don't think it varied very much. I think the concept of a Jewish Messiah now is very much what it's been all the time through history for the Jews.
Right. Okay. So it didn't change. The argument has been the same. It's never really gone away, but for some reason they've monopolized the argument. The Ashkenazi Jews have said, we're it, and the other Jews are not. And then they started to form that bond with the Sephardic. And but that's, later on down yonder. Now, when it comes to that Messiah, right, we look in the idea. Now, what strikes me funny is that the Greater Israel Project, for some reason, to people, it has appeared to be new. But we know that the Greater Israel Project has not been new. And if we look at the amount of time and effort that the West has spent in that area, you know, the Greater Israel Project has existed, and we've just prevented people from encroaching on that area.
Well, Herzl, who was credited with being the first modern Zionist political leader, part of the labor Zionist movement in Germany or Germanic area, he sought a homeland, and he was actually considering an offer to go to Uganda. He got sick and died mysteriously when he was in his mid-40s, which got the train going again to move back into Palestine. The idea of a homeland for places that had Jewish populations wasn't far-fetched at all, because they really saw a need to move them or isolate them. Judaism throughout Christian history has been the destroyer of civilizations, and I can't. This sounds very direct and maybe like an extreme statement, and there were always other groups of people involved, Puritans in particular, Huguenots, but they sought to eliminate the Catholic monarchies, sought to eliminate the Catholic Church in particular. Catholic Church always saw Judaism as an existential threat, and vice versa. And then they destroyed the Russian Empire, which was, the Bolsheviks were primarily a Jewish group, and so on. Even seeing through to today, the destruction of the modern Catholic Church, probably the latest victim, but they dismantled every culture they come in contact with.
Why? Why do they dismantle? Why do they feel the need? I know now. I know that now. Actually, we'll answer that right here, right now. The reason why they feel the need to do that is because they've been charged with killing the Goyim and the Amalek, all the evil that exists in the world, which is everybody around them, and is made either to get rid of them or become, you know, their subjects. And that's very clear. They preach about that all the time. The question is that at what point, I mean, the Middle East has realized this and they said it over and over again, but at what point does that get understood? That we are.
That's okay. That's a really good question, and you answered what you answered there was exactly spot on. For Americans, and Netanyahu referred to America as being the gun, and they held the gun. I don't know that we are anymore. We're not quite as big, bad, and tough as we think we are. But when does this stop? It's pretty difficult because you have an American population that's very certain, and especially within the evangelical churches, that they are good, they're virtuous, they're smarter than everybody else. The Muslims are entirely bad. Jews are almost like us. And questioning any of that calls their whole identity into play. And also it involves work. As you know, I teach a small study group in the church I go to on church history. Very, very few people go to it. A few more signed up than go to it, but it's just simply not a question, not a subject that people have interest in. They are very well set in what they have assumed to be true, what they're comfortable believing. What ends any sort of tyranny based on lies is for the people who have been lied to realize what the truth is. That stops it in itself, but it's a slow process. It's got to be something very dramatic, and maybe we're seeing that now.
Yeah, maybe, right? Hopefully it'd be nice. if the Enlightenment was taking place, people understood that. Now, it's slower than what we would want it to be, right? But let's get back to this idea because it's important because it's driven by prophecy and we are the Amalek. But let's get back to this idea of the Messiah, okay? And I think it's very important to understand that when it comes to the prophecy and it comes to the charge of Yahweh, which they're using, Old Testament stuff with New Testament for Christians, and there's, obviously an ulterior motive to that. But it's important to understand that the first Messiah that they claim to have came not from, a carpenter or poor folk or anything else like that, but came from one of the world's most powerful entities at the time that controlled most of the governments, most of the world at the time. They had hegemony in their hands, right? Well, almost. They haven't got there, but that would be.
They were close.
What?
They were close.
They were close, and it was moving that way because very shortly after that, they got control of opium. Then they beat the French East India Company, and then they caused the American War for Independence. But their Messiah came from the world's most powerful entity at the time, right? Sabbatai Zevi was the son of a board member, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to look up his exact title. He's a very prominent guy internationally from a wealthy family, and Frank was from a wealthy family as well.
Right. And so when we look at, but here's the interesting thing, right? And we know that it was born Ottoman Empire. Smyrna, Turkey was where Izmir, the correct way, Izmir was where all these people seemed to gather around. It was the most Western place in the Middle East, and really it could have been, claimed as being the New Jerusalem anyway, because it was controlled by them.
It was uncontrollable by the Ottoman Empire. It was an international city.
Yeah, they couldn't do anything about it, and they were very open about it. And a lot of people talk about the decay, and they didn't like the Muslims didn't like the Westerners, and so they were this, that, and everything. Well, when it came to their the Muslim-Jewish relationship, they had to continue and have that on a good relationship because they control the finances, right? They essentially ran that area. And so when people say that the Muslims are the enemy, we have to look at who the followers of Sabbatai Zevi became. Can you tell us a little bit about the Donme?
Sure. So there were probably best represented as crypto Jews, or you could say they were progressive Muslims who became followers of Zevi. So Zevi, the Sultan said, you're causing me too much trouble. You can either convert to Islam or you can die. And he says, I'll convert. Put the hat on. So that caused a lot of the Jewish followers, and which were, by the way, as many as half the Jews in the world were followers of him at the time. And he taught some very offbeat stuff, in moral inversion, which that's a long subject to get into, so I won't go there. But
let's summarize it. It is important. I think that a lot of people, especially when it comes to the what they call Judeo-Christian, which isn't a real thing. A lot of people understand that these Talmudic followers, especially when it comes to the Dom and the Frankists, they're looking for this type of meshing of the masculine and feminine soul, right? And that whole, transgression through.
Sanctification through transgression. Where things that are wrong, evil during the time of the Messiah become good, become virtuous. Moral inversion.
Right. moral perversion too. We can say that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But that's the thing. It was, when for the Christians that don't like the transgenderism and stuff like that, this is kind of the foundation to that. This
Oh,
is
it is.
this
You
is
bet.
that sacrificial aspect of they are giving to their warrior god who demands children and virgins and the blood of everyone that's not them. Um, Baal, Yahweh, I don't really care what you call him. He's the same. He's the same thing. Is that they're meshing this? This is to mesh it and create, a man that's feminine. The women's kid, as the Greek called it, right? That is them giving that up. That is them sacrificing us to that.
Yeah, and to finish the original question, many of the followers of his fell away, but others said, "Oh, he's just doing what Jews are allowed to do in the Talmud, which is lie to the Goyim." And he eventually caused the Sultan enough problems that even though he had a pension, the Sultan banished him to an island. But the Donme were followers of his, and the Young Turks evolved out of this group. So that brings us to like the Armenian genocide, where they killed by Muslims, and the Armenians did some things to not serve their cause well there. Also, I'll point out, but were they the victims of Muslims, or were they the victims of crypto Jews? And the probable answer is the second one.
I think that's generally the case because if you look at a lot of the spice trade and other things like that, the quote unquote most evil bad people, that murder on for fun, right? We're fairly peaceful.
Yeah.
It is the latter. But from that argument, right, we have the Dame, they become the Young Turks, right? Sabbatai gets banished. But like all things, you once again have two different groups that come out of it that both claim to be the mixed multitude, that both have to say, our Messiah is dead. We need another Messiah fairly quickly. Now, the rule for getting Messiah, which most people don't really understand this, is that you have to find the dumbest person around. You have to find the village idiot. The village idiot then somehow becomes Messiah. Why? Because he has to be handled and not to ask questions. And so this is your political leader, just so we can clarify here that this is the ones they're looking for. So you can make whatever parallel you want to make, especially when it comes to the vice president of the United States, right? And then I'm talking about Donald Trump, just so we get the joke there. Is that they went, one group of the mixed multitude who claimed to be the chosen people and claimed to tell the other chosen people that they're not the chosen people. I mean, it's getting confusing at this point. I hope you understand. I'm making an emphasis of the idea that this argument is essentially it, that there's multiple groups that want to be the chosen people, but nobody really can claim this one. And so the one group went out and got themselves, well, an idiot, Jacob Frank. Jacob Frank was the most unsuspecting person. He moved from Poland to Izmir, came from a wealthy family, and he created a whole different aspect of the invasion of other religions through this whole, transgression through vice, sin, whatever. Sorry, not transgression. What is it? Salvation through transgression, whatever. Is that the Frankists? So can you tell us a little bit about the Frankists, please?
Okay, so Jacob Frank, as you noted, was a Polish Ashkenazi Jew. He was very charismatic, good speaker. He's supposed to have been a large and very strong man. I can't quantify that. That's just a subjective definition that I've encountered a number of times. He made his way to Frankfurt. He was proclaiming himself to be the Messiah. I'm not quite sure what the order of events were here, but he claimed to be the important point, reincarnation of biblical Aaron in Sabbatai Zevi, which brings up another point that a lot of Christians would be kind of shocked at. Kabbalah, reincarnation is a big part of Kabbalah. and it's Tikkun Olam is repair the world. The reincarnation part is Tikkun something else, which is repair the soul. So he did run into financial problems. There were a lot of other unsavory elements in Frankfurt at the time. Prague and Frankfurt were always the center of gravity in Amsterdam of Enlightenment thought, theological liberalism, and Marxism. So he entered into a relationship with the Rothschilds, who were just coming into their own at that point.
Not just the Rothschilds.
What's that?
Not just the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds.
The Rothschild, yeah. And the Illuminati, who were eventually banned, but they found another home in the Freemasons as that became chartered and associated with the English government. So Frank mysteriously became very wealthy again. His daughter was kind of like the sex cult goddess, but when he died, she was not as charismatic as he was, and she ended up economically living kind of an ordinary life and dying.
But she did have followers, correct?
She did have followers, yeah.
Now the question was, and this is the weird thing, and so because we have the Epstein whole cases, that the rumor, again, which is same with Theodore Herzl and stuff like that, but when it came to Jacob Frank, it was rumored that he was in some kind of relationship at some times with his daughter.
But that's probably pretty certain, yeah.
And that was the whole his way of meshing the masculine and feminine spirit through that sexual act, which is very Talmudic and Kabbalistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now this should be frightening, okay? And why is it frightening? Because you have these messiahs that are doing that. The Domne literally means transgender, right? It
means transgender or sissy boy.
It was made as a joke, which they own very, pridefully, which is, should be concerning in itself. So you have that aspect of it, and that's how they were finding the feminine spirit. Then you have Jacob Frank, who takes on the Epstein approach. But where did the Frankists go? What happened?
Well, okay, now we're getting somewhere. So they by all appearances are still around. So when we talk about, and they're prominent Frankist families. So you can trace the families. And then within Jewish mysticism in particular, and even the Talmud, you have esoteric knowledge. And specifically when a man is instructed in Kabbalah, when they get to be 40, a lot of this esoteric knowledge is imparted on them. And in the case of Sigmund Freud, he saw a lot of things he couldn't explain, and then he suddenly said, "Oh, I get it now."
And he was supporting things that Jacob Frank would have done, which is
yeah. So the question that really comes down to is, do we have these very powerful people who are essentially cultist, Satanist, or something to that effect, whatever you want to call them, followers of Moloch?
Followers of Yahweh is what I'm going to say.
Yeah, so as strange as it sounds, the answer very strongly appears to be yes, and that's what you see in some of the Epstein files and other things that are coming out. And I'll specifically call attention to a movie, Eyes Wide Shut, that had Nicole Kidman and what her husband at that time was, Tom Cruise. Yeah.
Yep.
So now, in fairness to Jews, especially secular Jews, the people who are most inclined to call attention to this and document it are also people who are Jewish. They're secular Jews for the most part, but they're the ones that know it from the inside out. The movie is made about it. The director, there was a lot of material cut from it. It's still a pretty graphic movie, and it gets the point across. But it wasn't supposed to be a fantasy story. He was telling reality, and he died. He was killed, or he died opportunistically right before the movie came out, and they cut a lot of material from it.
Yeah, Kubrick is interesting. His whole story around this is interesting because he was part of the in crowd, and there was rumors that he was a part of the Apollo filming. You know, the B footage, so to speak, right? That they had, and he was rumored to be friends with Jolly West, though the picture turns out not so much to be Stanley Kubrick with Jolly West, and but Jolly West was somebody else, and it's just at the end of his life, he said, "I'm essentially dying." Right, this is where I'm going to. It's one of those, you know, if I die in a weird situation, it definitely probably wasn't an accident. But he releases this movie that says this is what's happening, and you know a lot of people can look past that, but as we just discussed with the Messiahs, is that fundamentally their belief system, their version of Yahwism, is exactly that. They've become so bored with money that they turn into this, and it has to do with that, you know, sexual acts and the meshing of the spirits and the sacrificial lamb, so to speak, which at 33 in the Talmud is you hit 33 and all of a sudden you go sacrifice a child or perform an act of a sexual act, at least with a goyim of whatever, right? And that's supposed to get you to enlightenment. Am I wrong on that?
No, you're good.
Right. So their Messiah somehow became the Messiah that most people are being fooled into following.
Yeah, I guess that's a fair way to put it. Fooled. Certainly, their idea of a Messiah and the Christian idea of Jesus coming back are couldn't possibly be further apart. And I'm going to say that probably a lot of not fully informed Jews probably would be surprised by some of this too, but they do kind of fall into the thought process where they're not thinking 3 steps ahead; they're thinking 1 step ahead all the time.
Now, is that conditioning? Right. We have the Rothschild thing. Why it's concerning is because you have one group of people who are blindly prideful and following, right? Then you have another group, the Goyim, who have been conditioned in the same manner, but yet you have men above them who are thinking 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 steps, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did we get in this situation? Because it does have to do with the mixed multitude question. How did they put the people of the states and the company, the corporation of Israel, into this idea of ignorance, or blissful ignorance, I should say, while they are the ones that think ahead? And why? Yeah. Well, let's answer the first question.
Well, I'd say there were 3 points there. The people in Russia and Europe were familiar with Jewish history. People in America were not. The media and the movie industry were Jewish dominated industries, and they were able to depict the concept of the Jew as the victim, especially in America. So they essentially through Schofield took over American evangelical Christianity, and then along with other interests, they caused the collapse of Catholic Christianity, especially in America. So you had this evangelical church, which was the hammer or the gun politically, and they controlled it. And they had and people in it, and I was in it for a long time. Were thoroughly believing that they were following the will of God, not understanding any of this. And so now the other peg of it is the Holocaust, which that's a good conversation in itself. But that made it, throughout the West at least, impossible to ever question anything about Zionism or even talk about Jewish history. And in Israel, which were founded by people who were they were atheists. They were followers of Trotsky and Lenin. They used all this to create a national identity. So you have people who see themselves as being superior to everyone around them and under constant threat. They're scared and they act scared.
Right. Now, let's move on real quick. Okay, so the next aspect of this is that you have the mixed multitude. Nobody really knows who the mixed multitude are. The question still can't be answered to the chosen people, right? Because everybody, for some reason, wants to be a part of it. And I guess it's their little kingdom of heaven, their slice of the pie in the sky, so to speak, which is foolish because, for Christians, fundamentally miss the point of what Christ is talking about. But Benjamin-Netanyahu has been in an interesting place, right? We saw the footage of him talking about, Israel versus the world, Israel versus New Rome, Israel this, Israel that. And while he's saying all that, footage appears, and I left it, so I can't find it, but footage appears of him being told by presumably a Talmudic rabbi. I'm going to say that.
Yeah.
Something that I would say is that Bibi Netanyahu is not just the ruler of the world of the end times, which presume Messiah, right, is a political entity, so to speak. But he's not doing it fast enough.
Oh yeah. So that goes back to the idea of the 6,000 years time of man, from the creation of man. So that was a Talmudic idea, even back in the time of Jesus. It was present in the early church. The song "Turn, Turn, Turn" in the book of Ecclesiastes by the Birds, that is the section of scripture that's based on. So he had 6,000 years, and you only got a little time left, or the 6,000 years is going to run out. That's what they're telling him.
Right. That's what they're getting him to believe. And what's crazy, right, is we all have this idea. We all look back at our lives, and we look back at a certain point in our lives. And I would argue it's about 2000 to 2010 when you start to really look at it and go, things have changed significantly. Right. And so to answer the question, when people ask, what is going on with this world, right? This is it. He had to speed that up. He's on crunch time. It's time to go. He's trying to destroy civilization so that he could be the New Jerusalem, the holy city, so to speak, right? What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's basically correct. And there are other factors that indicate he's on thin ice too. One of the biggest is the nature of warfare is changing. The U.S. dominance militarily is, I think that's for everybody to see right now, unless you're listening to Trump and Fox News all the time. This war ain't going so good. Sorry, that might be a shock to some, but that's reality, and I'm putting it very mildly.
Yeah, and I hear it all the time. America's going to somehow pull out this like superhuman, weapon that's going to just destroy everybody, especially with boots on the ground. Which is for me, you can say it, but wouldn't they have used it 3 weeks ago when they started losing the war?
Yeah, and then there was a U.S. apparently is bringing out a hypersonic missile kind of late to the game, but we think, we have been taught to think that we are smarter, we are way more virtuous and stronger than anybody else, almost like the laws of physics apply differently to us than to other people. That's no longer the truth. Our schools turn out sociologists and political science majors. Iranian and Russian schools turn out engineers. We are not what we think we are, and we are not morally superior. We're actually, I'm going to probably sound harsh in saying this, we've been morally blinded, or we've morally blinded ourselves.
Now, you've been in the defense game for a little bit, right? So I had to ask the question: are these hypersonic rent-seeking missiles?
Oh, the ones that the U.S. is rolling out.
Yeah, are these Raytheons like, let's get these out real quick, and they're going to be.
Well, that'll be interesting. I don't actually know. I had some knowledge of the Boeing hypersonic missile attempts, which weren't all that great. The
Great as the doors on their planes, huh?
we don't know how many exist, where they exist, or how well they work. But the fact is, the Iranians and the Russians have a full arsenal of these things, and anything over, I say about Mach 4, the odds of shooting it down are minimal. And we don't have a lot of good damage reports coming out, but it really looks like the amount of harm that's been doled out on Israel and these compliant Gulf states is fairly tremendous. And I wonder one of the things I wonder is if their airports are entirely non-functional and how long it will take them to make them work again. We don't really know, just barely starting to see the full extent of the economic damage that this has caused, and it might go on.
Now, okay, so let's come back to this, right? We see these hypersonic missiles. This war is getting out of hand. We're going to lose. We've lost, especially boots on the ground. That's the dumbest thing in the world. Nobody's done this in history. There's no historical examples. I don't care if modern warfare or anything else like that. History says what history says, and it's either figure it out how to put yourself in this direction or not. But now let's go back to the idea, because you watch the Hal Lindsey movement, the late great Planet Earth, and the Schofield, I'm gonna call it the Schofieldites and all this. Now, to me as a free thinker, if I can look back now and go, life was better in the late 90s, then we move into the early 2000s. It's kind of the last moment in time where you could look at it and go, it was somewhat not peaceful, globally, but what you saw, right? But then we hit about 2010, and all of a sudden it feels like everything's fast paced, and all of a sudden we're getting to war after war after war after war after war, and then we're here. And when you ask the question, the only thing that people can say is, "Oh, it's the end times. It's the end times. We're going to heaven. We're going to get swept away like a thief in the night, and all these liberals are going to stay here," right? How come and this goes along with Bibi's prophecies, why is it that's the conclusion to? Why is it that it's not that these guys are false prophets? They're playing off this prophecy that's largely fake and made up, and they're causing all this hell on earth, and we need to stop voting for everybody, and we need to restructure and think about it. Instead, it's like, let's get it, man. Blow up some more people, kill some more civilians, get us on up out of here, and let's get our mansions in heaven and have a good time.
Well, there are a lot of reasons for that, but the biggest one is that is ignorance and laziness of the population. We want answers that are easy. We don't want to think too much. We're historically ignorant. And the neoconservatism, or Leo-conservatism, if you want to peg it on Leo Strauss, bolsters all those things. It creates a boastful, arrogant population that thinks that it's our duty to run the world. Essentially, it's kind of a concept of Jewishness pushed through a evangelical framework.
Right, but at the end of the day, America doesn't survive this.
No, they don't.
They don't.
We don't. But that's, you have to do some, again, thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. And you know what typical person that's in this mindset thinks, and that doesn't cross their mind. And if it did, they'd feel so guilty about it, they'd couldn't stand themselves.
I would think that. You would think that, right? But I really don't think so. I really think that, nothing could stop them. I think about the idea, people talk a lot about the boomers, and for the most part, the majority of the boomers are the boomer waves. Some are waking up now, which is great. I hope that, over the next decade or so, whatever's left of them can wake up altogether.
Be careful. I'm one of those.
But the point is that they have been under this impression, and they're happy to bring on the end times because they've plundered everything. They haven't cared about the youth because they have said, I've got all that I've got out of this. I've taken from this world as much as I can. My house is worth $1 million. My car is a Corvette that I barely fit in. And I've gotten everything, and I've left nothing for anyone else because I've gotten my slice. And now it's time for me to retire to my kingdom of heaven, to where Jesus could personally pat me on the back and say, thank you for voting for that war. Thank you for killing those civilians. I'm glad that you believed in this and you made it here.
Well, we might be, a reference to the greatest generation, which isn't really a true statement in the first place, but we might be the worst generation. It's a longer discussion. I'd be glad to go into this and what it was like to grow up in that time period and how these beliefs were, so well adopted. But it had many facets. It had the collapse of the Catholic Church and people leaving it. It had music, kind of a redirected hippie movement, huge campus presence. It wasn't a unorganized media presence at all. It is rather interesting, but it takes a little longer to go through it.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that because it is something that it needs to be talked about. I think that especially when it comes to this, people are more than willing to kill the average schoolgirl in Iran if it means that they get to heaven faster. And so I think it's important. But that brings me to the next point, right? We have the war theology. We have theology surrounding war, and it's not a just war. If you look at Augustine says you can defend your right to live, which is what Iran's doing, just so we clarify that they are following the Augustinian rule. But you have Pete Hegseth saying, this is our crusade. We need to go slaughtering and spill all this blood because we are the army of the political leader, Messiah that's ruling us at the end, telling us to do this. And what's funny is, you look at that, you look at the First Crusade, right? We go to the First Crusade and we say King Joffrey, who was of the Moravian bloodline, who legitimately can trace, through Sumerians and the blood of Christ. Then you have Hegseth, who is preaching this theology to, I guess, low IQ people who bought into it.
He is a absolute embarrassment, and every time he speaks, it's like an insult to my intelligence. It really it demonstrates how far we've gone, how far we've sunk. The fundamental idea, though, I would say, is that as a Christian, I tend to believe strongly that the rules of morality that govern individual lives also govern collective decisions. What we're seeing here is a different way of looking at that, where they don't, where governments can do whatever they want to anybody for any reason, and in this case, to help bring about the millennium. And he's pretty much said as much. I mean, boy, I just cringe every time he opens his mouth. I really do.
I think we all cringe when he opens his mouth, but it's the idea that this is the final crusade. He might as well dress our soldiers up with crosses and and go forth and do whatever it is he's doing, because it's like, at what point though do we ask that question again? Do we say, what is happening? The nobody who even sits in the person occupying the chair in church on Sunday should be able to look at it and go, whew,
Well, that
not for me.
the tree is known by its fruits, and it goes back, and the thing that first crosses my mind, Jesus said, you call me Lord, Lord, but then he'll say, I never knew you.
Right. And also said, that's who you say I am. Right.
Yeah.
But that brings me to the next point, right, is that for those people who have yet to catch on after this entire conversation, the fact that the mixed multitude is fundamentally where they derive the question of the chosen people. And if we can really come down to the Exodus passage and talk about the mixed multitude were the ones that for some reason all died in a pit right after that, right? That's that whole thing. And they were declared not to be the chosen people, period, done deal, argument ended. But then you have this group, these Ashkenazi Jews who follow, again, Yahweh. Now, we can talk about this, and we will in a second, who then come out of this and are a part of the mixed multitude. And now they are the chosen people, because people don't really read the Bible, nor do they want to. They want to, listen to that feel-good music and then go home for the day. But Christ fundamentally denied this theology. Christ said that is not. He never made reference to Yahweh, ever, ever, ever. He didn't. He sat there and said, the kingdom of heaven is here and now. We are it. Wake up. Right? He went to the people with the least to lose, the least of these, to say, we need to preach to the house of Israel because they are following the warrior God, doing it wrong. When he occupied the temple, he flipped their tables. And we follow him? And not him, we follow them, I'm sorry. We follow them, right, into battle. He flips their tables and we follow them. He flips their tables, we take loans to buy our houses. He flips their tables, we buy a car with their money, right? And we don't ever sit there and go, Christ denied this. Christ said, Oranos, my Father in heaven, Theos. Theos was the word. It wasn't Yahweh, wasn't Elohim, and no, it's not a translation because it was in Greek. Okay, you could say it was in Aramaic, but you got to question that, because what exists in Aramaic? Almost nothing. And really in the Gospels, only one phrase was used, and it was mixed with Greek magical words, which is Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthon. But he denied this. And when he made reference to these texts, he didn't make reference to it with the idea that was what he was following, that was what he believed in, because he wasn't Jewish. By no means was he Jewish, right? And so ultimately, the early Christians sat there and went, we aren't following the Old Testament. We are not attached to Yahweh. Never, ever are we attached to Yahweh. We are Christ followers. We are following the fundamental teachings of Christ, which are 10,000 years. That prayer that is said, that he says, this is how you pray. He didn't say, our, Yahweh, who art thou in heaven, or thou, our Israel, who art thou in heaven. He said, our Father, Theos, Abba, right? Talking about the high God, the universal consciousness, the one that you need to reconnect. Be perfect like him. You can't murder people or call for virgins and claim to be perfect. And no, you can't be evil in the beginning and love at the end. It doesn't work like that. Not right before the books that go from the Old Testament to the New Testament. Yahweh doesn't change. He's evil here, he's evil here, and all of a sudden you have Christ, which is why they put Revelation there in the first place, because Christ was too loving and forgiving. And that's the big question of why did that book end up in the New Testament anyway? So the question is, when he did all that, he denied, said, no, that's not it. We're not following them. They're doing it wrong. They are of Satan. And he said that to not everybody. He said that specifically, if you look at Revelation, is that he looked at them in Izmir, Turkey, and said, you are fake. You are followers of Satan. That is the Messiahs that he denied. Whether you could say it was then or he was speaking of the future, right? Why is it that after all that, Christians, people founded on Augustinian beliefs and law, follow this group?
Well, I think the church under Christendom largely got the subject right, but then you going forth past the Reformation, you had this Judaizing of Christianity, and it really, the two key things are you have to elevate the Old Testament, minimize the New Testament, and then not be able to follow threads of thought through these things. And that's where we're at. But of course, it started with the Puritans, and then grew through some later movements, most notably Darby. But this isn't something that the Christian church has gotten wrong for 2 millennia. This is a relatively new heresy.
Relatively new heresy that nobody asked questions. Nobody asked questions.
Yeah.
So, at the end of it, when Iran beats us, Israel ceased to exist, and America is fundamentally destroyed. What will people say when they're not in heaven?
I'm not sure yet. I think a very likely outcome is what you said, that Israel will be constrained or destroyed. U.S. hegemony will be over. The petrodollar will be over. The U.S. will not have a presence in these compliant Gulf states, and the rulers of the Gulf states will probably be quite different. Where will that leave us?
And
I could give some forecasts, but I don't want to get ahead of myself.
that's fine, because I'll give some backcast here, okay? For those people, and this is my final thought here, and then we got to sign off because we got some good sports coming up. But for those of you who look at that and go, Israel's not, ceasing to exist, and if they cease to exist, it'll be the end times because Russia will get us. The problem is we can look back in history and say this has happened. In 1763, when the 7-Year War ended, the English East India Company over the next decade and a half experienced the very same thing. They treated people poorly. They exploited everything that they could. They stole everything that they could from these people, and they went to war, and they used force, and they used manipulation, they used belief to get what they wanted, and ultimately that company ceased to exist. That is what will happen to Israel. It won't be the end times. People need to understand that history speaks for itself, and if you don't listen, you look like an idiot. So, James, thank you for joining us. I appreciate that. As always, a fundamentally awesome conversation. I hope people learn stuff because we can't seem to understand why people are blindly following and not asking questions, and they aren't stupid by any means. They are capable of beautiful, wonderful thought. They are beautiful beings with hearts that may be 3, 4, 5 sizes too small, but have the ability to grow. And we have to understand that we need to wake up. So I appreciate y'all being here. I want you to know that if you can see here, this is the new Dissenting Goyim Show hat. Unite the Goyim and Amalek. Let's get it. Unite, unite, unite. We cannot be divided anymore. We got to come together. Have to come together. Okay? I have hats. I got pens. Unite the Goyim, and I have a cup, and I'm making shirts right now. So if you want one, go ahead, comment. let me know, and we're figuring out that. I'm setting up the shop and everything else like that. But I appreciate your time. You have been a part of the Dissenting Goyim Show. You are a Goyim who is dissenting. Keep that up. Keep asking questions. And anything on this show, please, please, please go read a freaking book. Okay? Go read a freaking book. I went and spent too much money on books, and we got them right here. Okay? Guys, and one more thing. Look into the opium trade because you'll find the heart and soul of this conversation today. We appreciate your time. Thank you.